Well, a very good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us here in the Grand Salon for another wonderful conversation. As promised, during today's talk, it's an unlimited supply of chocolate. So the person that can get through as much chocolate as possible will win a free cruise brochure. So please do enjoy. But here with a topic that I'm sure many of us are passionate about and we enjoy, welcome Mr. Andrew Johnson with The Story of Chocolate. Welcome, Andrew.
And now have the microphone on, so that's good. Nick talked about the passion of chocolate, and that reminds me, when Kathy and I lived in Brussels, as we did, about a block away from our 1928 Art Deco apartment was a beautiful little chocolatier called Chocolat Passion. And they provided the chocolates for our older son's wedding, and I'll tell you that story another time. But one of our joys of living in Brussels was the markets, especially the Christmas markets. And Christmas time, we would wander down to the Grand Sablon, one of the squares not too far away from the Grand Place. And there are four of the most spectacular chocolatiers in the world. Absolutely outstanding. Kathy's mouth is already dribbling because I have this picture of a chocolate eclair from Pierre Marcolini on the screen. Her absolute, to die for, favourite. And they and Vitamer and the other chocolatiers there, Neuhaus and so on, used to decorate their windows at Christmas in chocolate. There would be mannequins, full-size, oversized mannequins made of chocolate, dressed in chocolate, with flowers in chocolate. There would be Christmas trees in chocolate. Absolutely to die for. Now, you remember, I've shown you some strange signs over the days. I don't have a sign to show you today, but I do have one photo that I think the owner of this fire extinguisher company might prefer that you don't see. Poor Cliff. What can I say? Now, festivals need chocolate. And at this point, I think you deserve chocolate for being here. So Amber and Kathy are going to come round and give you, when Nick says unlimited supply, that's not quite what Harry agreed to, but yeah, there is a chocolate feature. But please, just hold on to it for a moment, or don't hold it. Keep it for a moment until everyone is served. And I then want to tell you how I believe you should taste chocolate, because there is a way, just as there is with wine or with whiskey. And while the girls are doing that, I want you to imagine any major festival that doesn't have chocolate. I mean, in my terms of celebration, Christmas or Easter without chocolate, I mean, it's unbelievable, unthinkable. You might be able to resist chocolate. I find it very hard. So you reach for a favourite bar, a favourite box, a favourite selection, or whatever it may be. And people who like chocolate tend to have a favourite manufacturer of chocolate as well. The chocolate that we're serving you today is 70%, so it's typical of high chocolate content. This is from France. We are used to chocolate from Spain, and they are very similar in their construction. So as Kathy is just finishing the handout, I would like you to take the chocolate tablet from inside the wrapper, break it in half, put half in your mouth and just bite it 4 times, and then let it sit on your tongue as it dissolves, and give it a few moments to dissolve. And then, as you can sense it starting to dissolve, breathe in, as you might do with wine or with whiskey. Just breathe in through a small opening between your lips, and start to feel the flavour starting to settle on your tongue and into your nose. Just 4 or 5 bites, that's all that it requires. And I will say, if you don't have a glass of red wine with you and you fancy a glass of red wine, what you have just done will enhance the flavour of that wine enormously, because a little dark chocolate before you have a glass of wine is a wonderful addition. So, cocoa originated in the Americas, and I think you know that because both Terry and I have shown you the map, the Columbian Exchange, that shows the things that came eastward and the things that went westwards. But in our ports in West Africa, particularly in Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana, and to a lesser extent, but still important to the economy, in São Tomé, cacao, chocolate, is very important in this century. The Ivory Coast, the Côte d'Ivoire, our next country of visit, leads the world in production and export of the cocoa bean. It supplies more than 33% of cocoa produced in the world. Massive to their economy. West Africa collectively supplies nearly 2/3 of the world's cocoa crop. The Côte d'Ivoire, the Ivory Coast, produces about 1.8 million tons, and Ghana, Nigeria, Cameroon, Togo, São Tomé produce about 1.5 between them. This is what a cacao tree looks like, and the pods that you see here are in different stages of ripening. The Latin name for the tree, Theobroma cacao, means food of the gods. Who am I to disagree? No. It's a shade-loving tree, native to the understory of rainforests, originally grown at low elevation on the foothills of the Andes and the great equatorial, sub-equatorial South American basins, the Amazon, the Orinoco particularly. Today, the tree is seen as a choice crop for areas in West Africa because the elevations are about right, soils are about right, humidity of the tropics is about right, and as I will refer to later on, labour is available, not under the right conditions. I was told earlier on that we now have cacao trees being planted in Hawaii as a replacement crop for pineapples, for example. So let's see how we make chocolate. Well, the seeds of the cacao tree have a very bitter taste, although they smell really rather pleasant. So there's a dichotomy there, and they have to be fermented to develop the flavour into something that we will enjoy. And after fermentation, the beans are dried, they are roasted, and the shell is removed to expose the cacao nibs. Now, up until rejoining the ship in Barcelona, our hotel director, Harry, has been on his vacation in the north of Brazil. And he went to some cacao producers while he was there. He even brought back some nibs with him. The nibs are then ground into a cocoa mass. This is unadulterated chocolate in its very rough form. And once that grinding happens, it separates into the two key components through heat. The liquor is drawn off, cooled, and the two components come from it are cocoa butter and cocoa solids, and they separate a bit. If you can imagine dripping after you've cooked a roast joint, you get the fat and you get the gel, and it's a little bit like that. Cocoa butter's 50 to about 57% of the weight of the cocoa beans, and that gives chocolate its characteristic melting properties. And for a chef or a cook or a producer of chocolate, the melting point is very, very important. The dry cocoa solids that are left, they give a lot of the flavour and are very important, powdered down. You know what chocolate looks like, of course. chocolate liquor is blended with the cocoa butter in varying quantities to produce the varying types of chocolate, or what is known in the chocolate industry as couverture, the different types. What you have had is a 70% couverture of chocolate. So to produce chocolate, sugar and cocoa butter are mixed for dark chocolate with cocoa liqueur, sometimes vanilla, not always, particularly in Europe, not always. They are allowed to be quite bitter. For milk chocolate, the cocoa liquor, then either milk or these days usually milk powder is added together with vanilla. And for white chocolate, just milk or milk powder and vanilla. Because it contains no added cocoa liquor, generally speaking, the purists will say white chocolate is not chocolate. And I have to say, it's not my favourite. And then if you want a chocolate fountain, for example, there has to be an additional high level of cocoa butter, allowing it to flow gently as it is melted in the fountain, producing a sort of chocolate fondue. The final process is known as conching. It's a milling process with metal beads, and they act as a grinder. The refined and blended chocolate is kept in a liquid state by frictional heat. The conching produces cocoa and sugar particles too small for the tongue to detect. Or, in some cases, Hershey's, for example, they leave a higher sort of powdery content in their chocolate. It's a less conched chocolate than European chocolate. Cadbury, in fact British chocolates and British style chocolates made in Australia and New Zealand and other places will have a finer conching, and Swiss and French chocolates will have an even more refined conch to it, and a final smoothness and quality of the chocolate. Then comes tempering. This is a warming process where the crystals are removed by gentle heat. Crystals are generally too small to see with the naked eye, but you don't want to be able to detect them on the tongue, nor do you want them to be seen sitting on the surface of chocolate. You want chocolate to have a consistent sheen, and you want it to snap as you expect it to. And tempering is the bit that does that. And from there, they create couverture, the styles of chocolate, whether they are 80%, 70%, 60, 50, whether they're milk chocolate or even white chocolate. And the addition of cocoa butter combined with the proper tempering gives the chocolate more sheen and a firmer snap when it's broken. And that creamy, mellow flavour that the prima donna chocolatiers around the world use. So where did this food of the gods come from? Well, the earliest evidence takes us back to the Olmecs of modern-day Mexico. There's evidence of chocolate beverages dating back to nearly 2000 before the Common Era. The majority of Mesoamerican people made chocolate beverages because beverages are the way that chocolate was consumed for centuries. The Mayans, the Aztecs believed that cacao had been provided as a magical or even a divine ingredient with special properties suitable for the most sacred rituals, birth, marriage, death. The word chocolate originates from this word chocotel, which is a classical Nahuatl word. Now, despite chocolate's importance in Mayan culture, it wasn't reserved for the wealthiest. It was readily available to almost everyone. In many Mayan households, chocolate was enjoyed with every meal. As a drink, it was regularly enjoyed in the evening before sleeping, as some of us do today. And Mayan chocolate was thick, it was frothy, It could be combined with chili peppers or honey or water. The Aztecs, on the other hand, took chocolate admiration to a whole other level. Like the Mayans, they believed cacao was given to them by their gods and enjoyed the caffeinated kick of hot or cold spiced chocolate. But they also used cacao beans as a currency. And for times in history, cacao beans had a higher value than gold. Perhaps the most notorious Aztec chocolate lover of all was the mighty Aztec ruler Moctezuma II. You perhaps know him as Montezuma. He supposedly drank gallons of chocolate every day for energy and as an aphrodisiac. It's said he reserved some of his cocoa beans for his military because he wanted them to have the strength as well as the strength of character that he believed that chocolate would give them. So the Spanish conquistadors came into contact with this chocolate very early in the European exploration of Central America. And we can't leave chocolate in Mexico without talking about mole. Favorite meat, you all know mole, I guess. Yeah, you've all tasted it? Yeah, okay. So mole, it is understood, at least by reputation, was created by accident. The story goes that at the convent of Santa Clara in Puebla, near to Mexico City, the archbishop was going to visit, and they had nothing to serve him. So the nuns created a mix with some chocolate, some stale bread, a few beans, and they killed an old turkey and created this stew, basically. And when the archbishop said to the nuns how much he admired this and asked them what it was called, one of the nuns said, "Well, I created a mole." And at that time, mole meant a mixture. Today, we will talk about a mezcla. Mole today, that word is now reserved for this dish and doesn't come up anywhere else that I know of in Spanish anyway. How did chocolate get to Europe? Well, there are three, all disputed claims as to how and when this happened. No European, as far as we can tell, had heard of chocolate until the 16th century, this popular American drink amongst American people. It's agreed it first arrived in Spain. I don't think anybody challenges that point of view. One story says that Columbus brought it back with him on one of his journeys, one of his voyages in the 1490s, or possibly 1502 on his last voyage. Other tales suggest that the conquistador Hernán Cortés introduced chocolate that was introduced to him by the Aztecs of Montezuma's court. And after returning to Spain with these cocoa beans in tow, he supposedly kept his chocolate knowledge a well-guarded secret. And the third story claims that friars who presented Guatemalan Mayans to Philip II of Spain in 1544 also brought cocoa beans back with them. Which of those is true? I don't know. And thick drinking chocolate is still very popular in Spain. We lived very close to, well, I say very close, within 20 minutes or so, of the factory of Valor chocolate in Villajoyosa near Alicante. And they are the most famous Spanish producer of fine chocolate. And one of our treats occasionally, if we were in Valencia, in the city, was to go to their chocolate house near to the cathedral, and we would have churros and a cup of their chocolate, into which the churros would be dipped to enjoy. And it is thick and lush. And our lovely friend Miguel, who lives close to our old farmhouse near Granada, once said to Kathy, "This is proper chocolate, none of your Belgian rubbish." By the 1600s, chocolate had made its way from Spain to the rest of Europe. 1662, Pope Alexander VII, this isn't the same Alexander I was talking about the other day, we're, 170 years later on, he declared that religious fasts were not broken by eating chocolate, which made him very, very popular indeed. Within about 100 years, chocolate had established a foothold throughout Europe, as you can understand. However, we can't overlook the impact of chocolate production on the peoples of the countries that we're going to. This new craze for chocolate brought with it a thriving slave market. Between the early 1600s and into the 1800s, the 19th century, as the laborious, the slow process of processing the cocoa bean was pretty much manual. It needed people, needed those hands to do the work. And so as the plantation spread, English, Dutch and French colonists planted cocoa, and with the depletion of the Mesoamericans, with the people who were native to these countries, who we were managing to kill off largely through disease, but sometimes more actively, because they were no longer available, the cacao production required labour, and that was provided by slavery. I'm not going any further into that now. Terry has a talk coming up. Is it this week or next? I'm not sure. On slavery, yeah. Next week, okay. Looking at the slavery in its broadest context. Sadly, this hasn't changed a lot. Modern day chocolate production comes at a cost. Many farmers struggle to make ends meet. Some turn to low wage or still to slave labour, to child labour even, to get their fields maintained, to get the cocoa collected. And children are trafficked in Africa today. So this has prompted a grassroots effort for large chocolate producers to sign up to fair trade or to some similar control and organisation. And certainly the British producers of chocolate, I think, are now all committed to fair trade principles for chocolate production. But that doesn't mean the whole world by any means. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back in Europe, in the 17th century, fashionable chocolate houses for the wealthy cropped up throughout London, Amsterdam, and other major cities. And Terry mentioned this, particularly in relation to the Worshipful Company of Grocers. I am a liveryman of the City of London. I'm a liveryman of the Worshipful Company of Joiners and Sealers. But the 112 livery companies of London each specialises in a particular craft or trade, and many of them date back to the sort of 14th, 15th century, as mine does. But in these coffee and chocolate houses, and later in the tea houses, only coffee or chocolate or tea were served. And the principle, the argued principle, was that this would take people away from the temptation of alcohol. I'm going to talk about that more in my talk on tea, which I think is coming up at the end of this week. So, chronologically, in 1815, the Dutch chemist Conrad van Houten introduced alkaline salts to chocolate, which helped to reduce its bitterness. And a few years later, he created a press to remove about half of the natural fat, the cocoa butter, from the chocolate liquor. It made the chocolate cheaper because what was taken off could be reused again, and it made it more consistent in quality. So you knew that what you were buying was what you were expecting it to be. And this really introduced a whole new innovation into chocolate production, exploited initially by this man, Joseph Fry. Known as Dutch cocoa, this machine-pressed chocolate was instrumental in the transformation of chocolate to its solid form. In 1847, English chocolatier Joseph Fry discovered a way to make chocolate mouldable by mixing cocoa powder and sugar with melted cocoa butter. Subsequently, his chocolate factory, which was Fry's of Bristol, in the southwest of England. I talked about Bristol the other day when I was talking about the Great Western route to New York. He began mass producing chocolate bars. And Fry's Chocolate Cream, the first creamy chocolate, launched in 1866 and became very, very popular. Over 220 products were introduced in the following decades, including Fry's Turkish Delight in 1914, and to this day, that is my mother-in-law's favourite chocolate bar. If I buy her a Fry's Turkish Delight chocolate bar, which is a rose Turkish Delight enrobed in chocolate, I'm her favourite son-in-law. Actually, I'm her only son-in-law. 1919, Fry's merged with Cadbury, and they formed a company called the British Cocoa and Chocolate Company. Milk has sometimes been used in addition to chocolate beverages, I guess since about the middle of the 17th century. But in 1875, the Swiss chocolatier Daniel Peter invented a milk chocolate by mixing milk powder with the liquor. And the milk powder was first developed by his near neighbour, Henri Nestlé. In 1879, the texture and taste of chocolate were further improved when Rudolf Lindt invented the conching machine, which I described earlier on. Switzerland's chocolates have earned an international reputation for high quality with many famous international chocolate brands. Their chocolate ingredients still come from Brussels, where I have to say, despite my friend Michelle's comments, the finest chocolates in the world are to be had. Chocolate arrived in Florida on a Spanish ship in 1641, an interesting circle. It's thought the first American chocolate house opened in Boston in 1682, and I will talk very briefly, because I don't want to get into politics, about Boston's connections with hot drinks when I talk about tea in a few days' time. By 1773, cocoa beans were a major American colony import, and chocolate was enjoyed by people of all classes. During the Revolutionary War, chocolate was provided to the military as rations, pretty much as Montezuma had done centuries before. And some of you may remember chocolate rationing from World War II. I don't, but I do still have my last ration book because while chocolate went off ration in the UK in 1950, tea, orange juice and sugar and a few other things were still rationed until 1953. And so I still have my last ration book somewhere. This is Milton Snavely Hershey. He was born the son of a Christian father. His family were members of Pennsylvania's Mennonite community, and his ancestors were Swiss and German, and they'd settled in Pennsylvania in the early 1700s. He grew up speaking Pennsylvania Dutch. He founded his first company, the Lancaster Caramel Chocolate Processing Company, when he was 30 years old, and he purchased the equipment he needed at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, and he soon began his career. He recognized that if he could cover something in chocolate where the something was cheaper than the chocolate, he could create a high-value product with lower costs attached. And so today we have fruit chocolates, we have caramel chocolates, we have nut chocolates and various other things where the ingredient enrobed in the chocolate is cheaper than the chocolate itself. He and his wife couldn't have children, so they decided to help others, establishing the Hershey Industrial School with a deed of trust in 1909, and in 1935 he established the M.S. Hershey Foundation, a private charitable foundation that provides educational and cultural opportunities for the residents around his businesses. Meanwhile, in England, a number of notable chocolate companies had their start in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Rowntree's of York set up and began packaging chocolates in 1862. They bought out a family business called Duke. Cadbury was manufacturing boxed chocolates in England in 1868, and they manufactured their first Easter egg as early as 1875. And imagine there, they are enrobing air. An Easter egg is a large, in this case quite a large item, but it's just filled with no-cost air. So they created the first modern chocolate Easter egg, and they were able to do that by purifying the cocoa butter so it could be easily moulded into smooth shapes. While conditions for those in the countries that grew cocoa were never good, the conditions for workers in the UK and in America were much better than those in other industries, because the manufacturers of chocolate tended to be social reformers. I've talked about Hershey already. Many in the UK were from the Quaker community, and many of them had been banned in other professions because they wanted better conditions for people. Chocolate was seen as a healthy product. What do we think about that, Terry? It was considered to be the remedy to the demon drink, so it was actively promoted in the temperance movement. A lot of caring organisations' employers came from Quaker stock, particularly following the Industrial Revolution. In banking, Lloyds and Barclays PLC, Backhouse Bank, Gurney's Banks, four big ones in the UK at the time, life insurance company Friends Provident, pharmaceuticals, Allen and Hambreys, Huntley and Palmer's, the largest biscuit makers in the UK, cookie makers in the UK, the largest matchmaker, Bryant and May, one of the largest shoe manufacturers, Clark's, and the big names in chocolate, Cadbury, Terry's, Fry's, and Rowntree. And in the United States, many more. I mentioned Hershey's, Strawbridge, and Clothier, the clothing chain in Philadelphia, was also owned by Quakers. But with good conscience came shrewd business sense, as they also realized that a happy worker was a more efficient worker. As an example of this, I'm going to look at a little at the Cadbury family. Now, can I just ask, how many of you are rushing off to the choir rehearsal? Right, okay. I will try to make a natural break in 6 or 7 minutes so that you can leave us. John Cadbury began selling tea, coffee and drinking chocolate in Bull Street in Birmingham in 1824. And he then moved into a production facility not too far away. The company became known as Cadbury Brothers, and in 1847, as I've said, Fry's, one of their biggest competitor, started to produce chocolate in bars, and at the time of the Second World War, the two companies were brought together. The Cadbury Brothers opened an office in London in 1854. They received the royal warrant as manufacturers of chocolate and cocoa to Queen Victoria. They held the warrant for Queen Elizabeth II as well, and in May this year, King Charles and Queen Camilla started issuing their warrants, and both have awarded a warrant to Cadbury's. And next year, Prince William, the Prince of Wales, will start issuing his warrants. And I think everyone is fairly confident that Cadbury, among others, will hold a warrant with him as well. The company went into decline in the late 1850s, mostly because of poor management. The number of employees was reduced to just 11. The company was losing money, and John Cadbury's sons, Richard and George, took over the business in 1861, and the brothers decided to build new premises in the countryside on the edge of Birmingham. Birmingham was logistically a wonderful place for manufacturing, especially this product. The sugar could be brought on the canal system. The cocoa could be brought from the docks in Southampton, London and Liverpool by train. It was an easy central place for all of these things. And the plant, the Cadbury plant, was established in a place called Bourneville, and they laid it out to include parks and recreation grounds and open spaces and ultimately accommodation as well. And it became one of the best standard of accommodation for factory workers anywhere in the UK and certainly in the West Midlands. The family were Quakers, and so there were no pubs on the estate. Understandable. 1900, the Bourneville Village Trust was set up to formally control the development of the estate, independent of the Cadbury production, the business, but it also to provide schools and hospitals and museums and public baths and reading rooms. And it became what it is today, a glorious garden estate on the edge of Birmingham. This is the Bourneville Rest House, which was created in 1914 to celebrate the silver wedding anniversary of George and Elizabeth Cadbury. And it was paid for by the workers. Voluntarily. In 1905, they launched Cadbury Dairy Milk, which has been the best-selling product of theirs since 1914. With the arrival of the war, more than 2,000 Cadbury male employees went off to fight, and to support the war effort, Cadbury switched quite a large part of its production over to the manufacture of hospital beds and the management of hospitals, and the buildings were converted into recovery units, and they started doing the laundry of injured soldiers and caring for them. Between the wars, they launched chocolate selections in tins, which to this day are very popular, and I would guess in UK supermarkets, this and 3 other brands have been on sale since probably the end of August in preparation for Christmas. Although I have to tell you, these tins seem to get smaller every year. Hey-ho. Chocolate ceased to be a luxury and became affordable to the working classes for the first time. By the mid-1930s, Cadbury estimated that 90% of the British population could afford to buy chocolate. And before the war, they accounted for more than 60% of the country's production. During the war, all of the manufacturers of confectionery produced rationed, of course, rationed product in much simpler wrappings. And when rationing of these items ended in 1950, they reverted to a more normal production. In 1967, Cadbury acquired the Australian confectioner McRobertson's. There was a rival bid from Mars, but Cadbury managed to achieve it and establish themselves in Australia. They were established in New Zealand, and I would guess 15 years ago, probably 15 years ago, Kathy and I went to the then Cadbury factory in Dunedin in South Island, New Zealand. No longer there, unfortunately, but things have to consolidate, I guess. Branding's always been very important in the chocolate business, and with the advent of TV commercials, many slogans became known by everyone. In 2010, Cadbury entered a deal with Kraft Foods to sell its interests, and that takeover happened in 2011. And that year, Kraft split out all its confectionery brands into this business, Mondelez, and you can see Cadbury is there, as are a number of other brands that I'm sure you will recognise. There'll be some favourites there. And Cadbury has one young lady, well, perhaps not so young, I shouldn't be rude like that, one lady whose job it is to check the flavour. And her tongue is insured for £1 million. She isn't allowed to eat vindaloo curry. She isn't allowed to sword swallow. I mean, I suppose it has to be said. She isn't allowed to eat strong chilies, and she isn't allowed to eat poisonous fugu fish either. But there you go. But £1 million her taste buds are insured for. And if you are ever in England, and particularly if you have your grandchildren with you and fancy somewhere to take them, Cadbury World is quite fun. It's a good half-day activity. Takes you around the factory, and you get to taste much more chocolate than we were giving you today. Few quick facts. It takes 400 cocoa beans to make 1 pound of chocolate. Each cacao tree produces approximately 2,500 cocoa beans. A farmer has to wait 4 to 5 years for a cacao tree to produce its first beans. Spanish royalty gave cakes of cacao in their dowries. Chocolate has over 600 flavour compounds, while red wine has just 200. And chocolate milk is an effective post-workout recovery. It is also an extremely quick, easy and dangerous way of ingesting sugar. A lot's happening. There are claims of healthy chocolate. There are claims of environmentally fair and fair trade chocolate. Some of those have yet to be proved. But I leave you with a thought. There are at least 7 chocolate days around the world, including 3 in the United States of America. Why they can't get together, I don't know. In terms of what I have still to come tomorrow, I'm talking about the European colonial legacies in Africa. I'm then the following day talking about tea, how that came to Africa, and European migration on, I guess that must be Friday at the end of the week. I'm losing track of time. And then I'll come back with a few other talks after that. But for now, those of you who are going to practice your carols, please do a good job, because we're looking forward to carols around the tree later in the week. And for the rest of you, remember 5:45 here tonight, Liars Club. You have to determine who's telling the truth and who's telling the lies. And Amber and I obviously have to tell the truth. So it will be, I am contractually obliged. Look forward to seeing you later.